Hi, if you're watching this video, you've probably made an inquiry or you're planning to join one of my classes. Because of the current situation that we're all living under, I'm no longer running introductory workshops. So I thought I'd make this little video, which actually I think could be a really beneficial way forward, because this will be something that you can keep, you can work through a few times before you join the classes, you can refer back to during the classes that you attend. I'm hoping at some point, I think currently, if you're one of the first people to watch this video, you'll be definitely starting Zoom classes with us. But at some point, hopefully, we will get back to real life classes and you'll have a chance to have a combination of both online and in real life. So today in this class, I really want to just go through some of the very basic key alignment cues that you will hear me use oftentimes and which apply to an awful lot of the exercises we do. The exercises themselves are not the thing that I really want to focus on, because you'll have plenty of time to go through those. And our 4-week terms are graded so that I will either pick a movement that we really deep dive. So let's say, for instance, we pick the plank. We'll look at every single part of the plank and how your body copes with that, what the impact is of the parts that are not coming to the party, what exercises you need to strengthen or help those areas mobilize to make that entire exercise better. And I like to do that because then at the end of the 4 weeks, you can really measure your progress. Or we'll take a specific part of the body. We might look at shoulders and arms, for instance, and really deep dive them, but also how they connect to the rest of the body, because nothing works in isolation. And it's often the thing that my clients find most fascinating is to really realize how, when you can't extend a wrist properly, the impact that's having on your shoulder blades, your neck, how it affects the alignment of your rib cage and therefore the ability for your abdominals to contract. So the only thing I would grab right now might be a pillow for your head, and we'll talk about why that could be a good option. There will be a couple of small things that you need to bring to class, but that'll be emailed out to you, and you'll have substitutes at home for those things if you don't want to buy specific equipment. So without more ado, come and lie on your back. And when you lie down, the first thing I want you to check is the placement of your feet and your knees. So I want you to think about placing both feet so they're pointing directly ahead. Now, people will usually make the assumption that that is naturally what they're doing, but the majority of people will turn out on a foot or both feet, or they'll favor weight on the outside edge of the foot or the inside edge of the foot, or one foot will be going one way, the other foot will be going the other way. So just take a moment to really zero in on your feet. If I asked you to press your big toe knuckle down into the floor, which is not the toe itself, but the knuckle that would be sitting in the ball of the foot, can you make that connection? Can you put a little bit of press down into it and then let it release? Then how about the second toe knuckle? Can you make a connection with that into the floor and let it release? And then usually somewhere round about now is when it all starts to go a little bit dark and murky. So if you think about that third toe knuckle, can you put that into the floor and let it release? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe this is an area we're going to have to work on. How about the fourth toe knuckle? And then how about the fifth toe knuckle? And could you just play up and down those a couple of times, going from the big toe to the second toe knuckle, third toe knuckle, fourth toe knuckle, fifth toe knuckle, just so you start to get a sense of the width of your foot and whether you have areas that feel much clearer or much more obvious to you than other areas, because that may be the first little inkling we get of where you like to carry your weight on your feet. Then I want you to think of the outside edge of your foot, knowing that it spans from the end of your baby toe all the way around to the back of your heel. If you were to press your 2 feet down in the floor, would you be able to leave me a really clear imprint of that outer edge? Or can you feel that there's some areas down the outside edge of your foot that you're not too sure about? And then can you do exactly the same thing on the inside edge of your foot from big toe to heel? And if you were able to leave me an imprint of your foot or feet, would you be able to give me an impression of every single toe joint, every single toe, the whole outer edge, the whole inner edge? And so hopefully that might have brought your awareness to the fact that you had parts of your foot that weren't as connected to the floor as they could have been. And now you've been able to either correct that or at least have an awareness of it. So then we're going to move up to the space between your knees. So in class, when I refer to hip width apart in anatomical or movement terms, that doesn't refer to the outside of the pelvis, strangely enough. It refers to the inside distance. So if you place your hands on your hips as if you're going to tell somebody off, or on the top of your pelvis, you can kind of feel how those bones come around and down in front of you. So can you place your fingers just right up on the inside of those two bones? If you're not sure, I'm about to sit up and I'll show you exactly where we're going. So it's right on the inside of the pelvis. Here's the top where I can cup it with my hand, and then I can come around and down the inside. And that would be the hip width apart. So for me, it's about 2 of my fists, give or take a little bit. So you want to get a rough idea of what that space might be for you and see if you can place your knees about that space apart. None of this has to be to the millimeter perfect. It's a starting place and it's a bit of a generic one size fits all. But as we move through the work, eventually you'll find your place that makes sense to you. So once you have that, in a perfect world, we have 2 knees that are pointing forward now, 2 feet that are pointing forward. Now we want to take the attention to the pelvis. So your pelvis, your rib cage, and your skull all interact with each other. The skull and the pelvis will always, or should always, move in tandem with each other. Where one goes, the other will follow. The rib cage does the opposing motion, or it should do if you're going to have healthy back mechanics. So we're going to look at the pelvis first. So if you come back to cupping your pelvis or putting your hands on your hips, and then just find the top side of those bones, the side that is closest to facing toward the ceiling, and let your fingers rest on them. So I want you to see if you can get a sense of letting these bones push up toward the ceiling. And then can you let them drop down toward the floor? Now, if it doesn't make any sense, don't worry, because we've got 2 or 3 more ways that we're going to go through to see if we can get this motion going. But if you can feel that you can manipulate this top part of the pelvis upward, you should feel how your lower back is leaving the floor. And actually, the top of the pelvis that's sitting behind you is coming away from the floor. And if you can bring these 2 bones back down toward the floor, you should feel how the lower back gets flatter and this top of the pelvis behind you is pressing down into the floor. So if it's not making sense to you from the pelvic bones, can you find your pubic bone? Can you let that bone move up toward the ceiling, down toward the floor? And if that makes sense to you, then you should feel how the lower back goes flat in the floor, comes away from the floor. If none of that makes sense, and some of that may be that you have or have had low back issues and your low back is pretty tight and tense, and it's a place that's hard for you to move, we're going to go and think about the lower back rather than the pelvis. So can you take one or both hands and slip them in the small of your back? Can you get your middle fingers to meet underneath your belly button? Now, if this doesn't work for you, if you have shoulder issues, then I would pause the video, find a small hand towel, and fold it over a couple of times long ways and put it under the small of your back. So now I want you to take a breath in, and as you exhale, I want you to sink the small of your back down onto your fingers until there is no out breath left. When you inhale, can you let the small of your back lift away from your hands until you're full up with air? As you exhale, can you let the small of your back sink down onto your hands? So you're pressing your hands down into the floor. And on your inhale, can you let the small of your back come up and off your hands? Now take the hands out and continue that motion, but place your hands on the front of your pelvis. Now you could do this and join your thumbs and first fingers together. And when you place that on your pelvis, you want to have the thumb sitting just below the belly button, the first finger's resting on the pubic bone, and the heel of the hand is resting right on the inside of those hip bones that we looked at a moment ago. Now, as you exhale and you sink your lower back to the floor, the pelvis should respond to that. And so now you may be able to feel how the pubic bone is shooting up toward the ceiling and the inside of these two pelvic bones are dropping down toward the floor. Now, when you inhale and you lift the lower back off the floor, can you feel how the pelvis responds to that? Now the pubic bone starts to point out through your feet and these two hip bones come up toward the ceiling. So as you exhale, the lower back sinks down into the floor, takes the pubic bone, points it to the ceiling, the two hip bones drop back. As you inhale, the lower back comes off the floor and the pelvis begins to move forward. So I want you to do that 2 or 3 more times. If you think of the exhale as a very deflating, compressing breath, like letting the air out of a balloon, that's what allows the abdominal muscles to contract, your back muscles to stretch, and brings the bones down to the floor. When you inhale, if you think of that balloon expanding, inflating, that's what allows your abdominal wall to stretch and your lower back to contract and allows the arch to come into place, the pelvis to move forward. And every single breath you take, your pelvis and back should go through this range of motion, much more subtly, obviously, because you don't generally see people walking around looking like they're flexing and extending their spine. Can you find for me now a middle ground? So oftentimes, people that have had low back pain or are suffering a lot with tension in their neck and their shoulders, the two most common reasons why people get sent to my classes, their rib cage is coming along for the ride. And the first thing we want to work on is differentiating those two movements. So can you now place your hands on the front of your rib cage? And I want you to go lowish. So I'm going to go down to the part that's near to my belly button. Now from here, as you exhale and you sink the lower back to the floor and the pubic bone comes up, can you feel how the back ribs come down into the floor and these front ribs also sink away from your hand? Now, as you inhale and you want to pick up the low back bones, can you keep your rib bones attached to the floor? Now, they'll get lighter for sure, but what you don't want is this, where the ribs come right up. And now I could easily get my hand in here and it feels like my low back arch is running the length of my spine. And it feels like I could get a small truck between me and the mat. Okay, this can be a tricky thing to get hold of. So as you exhale and the lower back comes down into the floor, we've already examined how the pubic bone points to the ceiling. The pelvis begins to roll backward and upward. The ribs should naturally, the back of the ribs brought to the floor, the front of the ribs sink down. And if I were to stand you up, the rib cage would actually be bowing outward towards your back, while the pelvis is going down and under. They're kind of doing opposing movements to each other. So now when you reverse this and you try to let the lower back come off the floor and the pelvis begin to roll forward, while those rib bones should stay on the floor and get lighter, they should not arch off the floor. So if you're playing with this and you just keep feeling the back of the ribs want to come off the floor, or you're kind of, well, even when I start, I just don't have this bottom half of the rib cage anywhere near the floor, which was definitely my experience when I first started going through this work. That immediately tells you you want to cushion up your head. So how many cushions you need is really individual to every single person that starts with me. But if your habit of moving through life is to have your head a little forward of where it should be, or your rib cage forward of where it should be, and we'll play with that later on in the class, then when you lie on your back, your upper back tension is so great, those muscles can't relax and let everything drop to the floor. If you can pillow up the head, sometimes the neck and the top of the shoulders also. So sometimes having pillows so that they're stacked more like this will allow you to feel these bottom back ribs to drop on the floor. So that's something you really want to play with. And again, you could just pause the video, see if you can find what you need for your head that will allow this bottom portion of the rib cage access to the floor. So once you have all of that and you can roll your pelvis up toward the ceiling, forward towards your feet, you can feel your lower back coming into the floor, up off the floor. You can feel weight deepening into the back of the ribs, coming off the ribs. Well, you've done an amazing job right there. You've already got your spinal mechanics moving much better. And if you've watched this and you kind of grasp it, but it's not happening, I would say it took me probably a good year and a half to really start to get this stuff so that it felt very natural. And when I lie down on the floor, depending on what I've done through the day, most of the time I can just get the back to settle where I want it to. So don't beat yourself up. If you were perfect, you wouldn't need to be here. And I've yet to meet a perfect person. So we're going to start off with a pretty classic Pilates exercise from all schools of Pilates. Pretty much this movement is in here. So I'm going to give you the base level of this that teaches you what you're trying to feel, and then we'll go into the shoulder bridge proper. So you remember how we made that triangle with the thumbs and your first fingers? Can you take that for me and place it on the front of your pelvis? What you're trying to feel is that the two front bones on the pelvis and the pubic bone form a flat triangle, pretty much like you would use on a snooker table to put the balls in. Now, for most people, if they try to get to that point, they'll feel those back ribs go off the floor again. So we have two options here. One is to pillow up the head and help them to come down. Or the second is to notice the gap that you have and not allow it to increase. So from here, I want you to press down into the whole surface area of each foot and lift your pelvis the tiniest amount off the floor where you have kept that triangle level, and then let it come down. So depending what you're watching me on, you might be able to see how there's barely any difference. I can just about get a hand between my bum and the mat and straight back down. What I want you to notice is when you go into this lift, do you do it by pushing your ribs up toward the ceiling to lift the pelvis? You'll know that because you'll feel the lower back arch increase. You'll feel these back ribs come off the floor. That's what we're not looking for. So just this first part of, can you keep the ribs quiet and just lift the pelvis, keeping it level? That might be the first part of the exercise that you need to work on for a little while before we even add any extra parts into this. Okay, so we're going to move on and assume that you've got the ribs to behave, you've brought the pelvis up, you've got this little tiny flat triangle. Now, the next layer is to see whether you can take 1 foot off the floor, the teeniest amount possible, without your pelvis changing position at all. Now, if you felt yourself shift or twist or drop or your back arch while you're standing on one leg, can you do anything to fix that? And put the foot down and come down. Okay, so from the beginning, the pelvis lifts the tiniest amount possible. I don't want you to toe grip, but I do want you to push down in your toe knuckles, push down into your heels to let the pelvis come up. And right now, you're going to try and notice whether you pulled ribs up with you and see if you can get them back down. Now, weight shift onto the leg you just picked up and pick up the other leg and see whether there was a reason why you chose one leg in preference to the other. You might notice that this is the side that's not very enthusiastic about holding your body weight. Can you fix any of the multitude of things you may have felt yourself do that took you from balance to twist or shift or drop or arch? Put the foot down and come down. So as we go again, the next layer would be to not rest between each one. So as you press into the feet, the pelvis comes up that tiny amount. You check that the ribs have stayed down. Now, as you weight shift, nothing with the rib cage and the pelvis should change theoretically to get this foot. And it's really tiny. You see how my foot is just about hovering off the mat. And then you try to fix here, whatever it is that's not holding you, and then bring the foot down. Weight shift over onto your new standing leg, and then pick up the other foot, and then fix whatever it is. There's still this one side that I can always feel is much more challenging to stand on. Bring the foot down and come down. And then we're just going to go one last time here. So pelvis comes up, small, ribs are down, weight shift into one leg, the other foot, teeny tiny lift. Now, if you're using your elbows on the floor, pick them up and see what difference that makes to you. Now try to square the body back up and put the foot down. So with no elbows, no stabilizers, can you pick up the other foot? Can you square off whatever went on the skew with? Bring the foot down and come down. And all of these things take time to get better and better at. So initially, you just want to become a really good observer of your own movement and not beat yourself up when you can't do something. The goal is to be really curious. So, oh, that's interesting. I never realized that when I weight shift on my left foot, I swing my hip out here or I throw my ribs forward, because these are the postural habits that you have that we're going to try and work on over time to fix. And I can only tell you that after, I don't know how many years now, 3 or 4 years of doing this work, I have fixed so many things that just work so much better. But it is time and patience for sure. So that exercise leads nicely into shoulder bridge. So from here, I want you to press down into your feet. This time, as you lift the pelvis up, now we are going to take the lower back up, the rib cage up. I'm going to take the pillows out for this. It's too much on my neck to have my head propped up. Now, when you come into bridge, in my classes, the goal of bridge is to strengthen your behind and the back of your legs. I don't use this as a precursor to a back bend. So if you've learned it a different way, there's nothing wrong with the way you learned it. This is just a specific goal that I have. So here's what I'm looking for. First and foremost, have you just created tension in your lower back? Can you feel that you've put a big arch into there? I want you to pay attention to this upper 1/3 of your back. You've got weight sitting on the top of your shoulders and maybe to at least halfway down your shoulder blades. Now, can you think of the back of your rib cage dropping a little closer to the floor, and place your hands on the front of the ribs? Without your rib cage moving, can you lift your pelvis closer to the ceiling? So can you see how these two hip bones are lifting up, lifting up, lifting up? But actually here, my ribs have stayed completely still. Now, if you can get a sense of that, when you run your hands from your rib cage to your pelvis, that will feel level relative to each other. Instead of this position that I see a lot of, where you come over the ribs, you kind of drop down, and then you find the pelvis. We don't want that. Drop the ribs down so you've got this upward ski slope. Now take a breath in, and as you exhale, place the spine down one bone at a time, or that's the ultimate goal. So at some point, you're going to have to find that position for the pelvis where the pubic bone is to the ceiling, to let your lower back be in that rounded hammock position that allows the bones of your spine to come down into the floor and then to drop forward. So we're going to do that 2 more times. Press through the feet, lift the pelvis up, lower back up, ribs up. At the top of your position, depending on your postural habits, you may have to drop the back ribs down to create this long ski slope. Now, without the ribs helping you out, press into the feet again, not the toes, the ball of the foot, and specifically the heel, and see if you can lift your hip joints towards the ceiling. You're looking to feel the back of your thighs, your bum begin to fire up. And if you don't feel that, I would drop the ribs even closer to the floor and then work on getting the pelvis a little higher up. Exhale and roll back down. Okay, one more time. Press through the feet, lift the pelvis up. Then soften, drop the shoulder blades on the floor, maybe some ribs on the floor. Open up through the hip joints, press the pelvis upward. The knees, watch that they're not splaying out, and then exhale and roll on down. When you come all the way down, let your legs go out to straight, and then just roll the legs a little outward, a little inward. Just shake them out a few times, give them a bit of a break. So from here, we're going to work on the curl up, lifting your head up and forward from the floor, and work on the techniques needed for that to try and keep your neck out of the equation and your abdominal wall doing what it should be doing. So you could rebend the knees for me, or you could take a break from that position and bring the soles of the feet together or cross at the ankles. You could put cushions under your knees to support them. I quite like this position because people who tend to grab a bit in the hip joint, it makes it much harder for them to do that, and encourages you more to get into your abdominal wall. So you're going to interlace your fingers. And when you do that, I want you to notice which first finger is closest to you, and then bring the hands to the back of your head. So you're cradling the base of your skull. If your thumbs are free, you could let them run down either side of your neck, and then close your elbows inward. I tend to find that if you close the elbows in, for the majority of people, it really helps their rib cage to sit in a better position. Now I want you to tip your head up toward the ceiling. I'm just going to open my elbows in case this doesn't make sense. So you're looking up towards the top end of whatever you're working on, and then look down towards your feet. So as you nod this little yes upward and then downward. Can you feel how your neck changes position? It arches as you look up and back, and it straightens as you look down. Can you find me a middle ground between the two where you're favoring more this sense of the downward part of a nod yes as opposed to the upward part? Now close your elbows and fix your eyes on a spot on your ceiling directly above you. I want your arms to pick up your head and your neck and lift them straight to the spot you're looking at, and then lower back down. So if you're doing this part correctly, if your thumbs are resting on the back of the neck, you should be able to monitor how your neck has not really changed shape right now. The chin has pretty much stayed angled down towards your chest or looking down the front of your body as you lift up and as you come down. So this part where you're lifting here, we start to get into this more superficial six-pack muscle, which does most of the work in the curl forward. And you start to get into the higher fibers of this around the top of the rib cage. Now we want to get the curl up proper. So as you come up to your ceiling, now start to look forward along the ceiling to whatever is in front of you until you're looking out through your knees. And at that point, you should have felt your neck and your head change position to look forward. And then look back the same way, from the ceiling to the wall in front to the floor until you come back. So as you come up, look up at the ceiling first. Now look forward along the ceiling, down whatever is in front of you, wall, windows, furniture, along the floor towards your feet. Now look back towards the wall, go up the wall, along the ceiling till you're right back on your spot and your head drops down. Now the breath for this is an exhale as you come up and as you come forward, and an inhale as you come back and down. So you can work faster or slower than me. It's absolutely fine. I'm just going to keep giving you some alignment cues. So I want you to watch that the elbows don't start to fall open, and that you see if you can really give the weight of your head to your hands and your arms while you concentrate on being able to use your eyes to pull your head, neck, and spine forward. Where your eyes go, your head will follow, and where your head goes, your spine will follow. And then this time when you come back down, take your hands out, remembering which was the first finger closest to you, interlink and change them. Okay, now unfold your legs and bring your knees into your chest one at a time. So when the knees are resting on the chest, the lower back is sinking down into the floor for most people. So nothing else changes in the alignment I've given you so far. Your chin angled downward, your eyes looking straight up. Exhale, come up to the point you're looking at, and then let your eyes look forward and down so you get this change of shape in your neck. Now, can you hold here and slowly move your thigh bones forward, only where your lower back stays on the floor, but maybe your stomach muscles are starting to tremble a little bit, and then bring the knees in and the head comes down. Okay, so 2 more times. As you exhale, come up to the point you're looking at, look forward and down. Once your head is up and forward, now move your thigh bones forward. I want you to be able to keep your low back on the floor. You'll feel that tensional pull in the abdominal wall, and then let everything come back in. You have 1 more time. So if it's straining on your lower back, the legs are going too far forward right now. So you can keep the knees pretty close to your chest, and then let everything release back and down. Good job. So from here, you're going to turn onto one side and come on up to sitting. So in seated, we're just going to pick out the Pilates exercise, the roll up. because it ties in really nicely with everything you've done up to this point. And to be honest, really getting an understanding of the pelvis moving is the key to being able to unlock a lot of the rest of your body. So in seated, we're going to do this with the knees bent. Now, if you can get the feet flat to the floor without them cramping, go for it. And if not, put your heels on the floor. More importantly is to figure out where you're sitting. So at the bottom of your pelvis on each side, the bones come down to like this little bony outcropping, like a kind of a Worthing pier on each bum cheek. I shouldn't really say this because not everybody that's watching this is from Worthing. So you can, yeah, I ought to think about that really. So just two little bony outcroppings might be a good description. So take your hands halfway down the back of the thighs, rock side to side. Now, those bones are really prominent. It doesn't matter how much soft tissue you have back here, you can feel them. So if you're not sure and you're kind of like, yeah, I think I might have them, you really don't, because you know when you are on them. So the best thing is to lean off to one side, grab some of that soft tissue, pull it back, and then sit back down. And you might right away be able to feel how you're right up on that bone. And then you do the same thing to the other side, grab some of that soft tissue, pull it backward and sit it down. And hopefully now you've found those two bones, one on either side. And if you haven't, play with that a couple more times until you can clearly feel them. Hands go behind the back of your thighs. Actually, let's go this way. Let's go below the knees and just on the front of the shins. This is usually an easier place for people to start. Lean back until your arms are straight. You see how my elbow is locked out? That's what I want you to keep. And now you're going to see if you can roll your pelvis forward and backward, forward and backward. So can you see how the movement is isolated here? Just like you did lying on your back, this front pelvic bone trying to come forward towards your thigh bone and then back behind you. Underneath you should feel that you go from sitting right up on top of those bones to dropping back a little bit behind them. What shouldn't be happening is your elbows should not need to bend and straighten. They should stay completely straight. So this would be the first thing to play with. And this is often a really tricky thing for people that have stiffness in their lower back to begin to get hold of. Breathing again can be really helpful. So if you think of an exhale when you're trying to roll the pelvis backward, or if you were lying on your back, you'd be flattening your back to the floor. And then the inhale as the pelvis rolls forward, right away, that breath will start to help the mechanics of the body move better. So remember how the exhale is a deflating, compressing, coming down breath. And then the inhale is a really forward and up breath. You could also use your feet. So if you think of pushing your heels away from you as you breathe out, the force of the heels pushing this way can push the pelvis backward. Now, as you inhale, if you pull your heels towards you, it'll help to bring the pelvis forward. So as an exhale, push the heels away, pelvis goes back. Inhale, pull the pelvis forward. The biggest giveaway for people who are doing this from their chest and their upper back is you'll see the elbows bending and straightening. So just keep going back and checking in with that. If you think you have it, reach the arms forward. And now as you push with the heels and you breathe out, roll back. How far back you go, well, that depends where you think you're going to be able to come forward from. And to come home, pull the heels to you and roll forward. We're going to do two more. Take a break if you need to. It is very common for people to feel pinching in the front of the hip joint. And if you feel that, just let the legs go out to straight, lean back on your hands and roll the legs in and out. One more time. And then pull the heels forward. Okay, so the next position we're going to explore is lying on your front. So when you come to lie on your stomach, today we're just going to do a very simple position of placing one hand on top of the other. Now, I may keep my head up so I don't muffle the mic, but you should definitely rest your forehead down onto the back of your hands. So when you're lying on your front, the bone that should be most prominent or most obvious would be your pubic bone. If you can feel that actually it's more rib cage, or potentially if you're a female with a chest, you can feel it's more boobs that are on the floor, I want you to play with the idea of making the front of your rib cage rest more lightly against the floor. So there's a subtle feeling of pulling the rib bones away from the floor, which should get the pubic bone to rest more heavily. Now, there's not much to see on camera here because the motion is pretty subtle of trying to get the ribs just to lighten up and the pubic bone to go heavy. But this is particularly important if you have low back pain and lying on your front is problematic for you. This would be the thing that I would practice without adding anything else into it. So if you've managed to find this sense that you can begin to think about ribs coming away from the floor so they're connected to the mat beneath you, but they're not heavy, you might be able to feel how the abdominal wall is contracting, the pubic bone is getting heavier. From there, all you're going to do is bring your head up with your eyes looking down at your hands, your neck really long, and then let your head come back to your hands. So as you lift your head up, can you now maintain that sense of light ribs against the floor and a heavy pubic bone on the floor and come back down? If you have that under your belt and you feel you could take more instruction, now press your elbow points down into the floor without losing that sense of light ribs and heavy pubic bone. Make sure that you don't change the shape of your neck, so that right now we're trying to work just into this top 1/3 of your upper back. Last one here. Okay, now from here, I want you to bring your hands under your shoulders and push up onto all fours. If you're taking care of low back stuff, then you come up and join us in whatever way allows you to move with minimum pain and discomfort. Now, on all fours, alignment really becomes important. So can you check for me that your knees are under your hips and your shoulders, your elbows, your wrists all line up with each other? Now, right away, if you are somebody that struggles to hold weight on your wrists, for now, you can bring the knees forward and lessen the pressure on your wrists until you've worked with me long enough to know what wrist and hand exercises you need to do to help that out. So now on all fours, can you find that same motion in your pelvis of tucking and untucking here? So here you could reference the tailbone, the sacrum, tuck the tail under, bring it back to the ceiling, tuck it under, bring it back to the ceiling. Can you do this without the ribs needing to join in? It's going to feel pretty small and pretty subtle. But most people that I will teach in a class will get on all fours and be in this position where there's no low back curve. So this needs to be your first thing. Can you find the difference between those two positions? Can you settle where you have a low back curve? Now, low back curve is different to this, which would be ribs hanging to the floor and pulling on your back. So still on the front of the body, you want to feel that the rib cage to the pelvis is level relative to each other, and not this where the ribs would be lower down than the pelvic bone. Moving up to the arms, because now I've kept you here all day. There's just one thing here that we're going to talk about today, which is the crease of your elbows. So if you have a tendency for your elbow creases to do this and look in towards each other, I want you to rotate them out until they're facing out through your middle finger. Once you have that, instead of wearing your shoulders around your ears, slide them back down. So we've got elbow creases rotated forward, shoulder blades slid down your back, a pelvis that's untucked. Now we're pretty much good to go. So from here, can you take one arm and reach it forward? Now look at the standing arm. Do you still have your shoulder, your elbow, your wrist stacked up? And is your elbow crease still in the same place? Bring your hand back down and do the same thing with the other side. So initially, until you can really keep the standing arm in the position that I'm asking for, you don't want to load anything else onto this. If you go onto one arm and you do this and you drop your chest and you sink into the shoulder blade, then you're really not ready to add on the next parts just yet. We need to build a lot more upper body strength for you. If you think you're doing a good job of holding all of those parts, take out one leg, and whichever leg you've taken out, reach the opposite arm forward. Now from here, if you can control the parts, these two will lift and lower, and nothing should change from the setup. So you've got your elbow crease forward, your shoulder, elbow, wrist stacked, arm and leg going out. And you see how I'm not collapsing into my shoulder and my ribs. I'm able to keep all of that stuff lifted and then bring it back in. And then same thing on the other side. So as you lift and lower, the other thing to look for is that you're not twisting, that the pelvis stays pretty level. So on the leg that's coming up, that hip bone looks down toward the floor. Last one here. And then from here, take a rest position back. So for me, that would be the precursor to doing planks and push-ups and side planks, is being able to hold your body weight on all fours, move at least one of the limbs out of the way with good control before you start adding other parts on. And then come back onto all fours for me. And here, this is kind of like shoulder bridge in reverse. A lot of people call this the cat stretch. So spread out your fingers and thumbs, slide your shoulders down, and rotate your elbow creases forward. As you exhale, tuck your tail under, and now bone by bone, come up through your spine until your head drops down and looks back through your knees. Inhale, reverse your tailbone up to the ceiling, sink into the small of your back, drop your ribs to the floor, and as you bring your head up, you want to think of your chest just below your collarbones, pulling forward and pulling up. Exhale, tuck the tail, round all the way through the spine, one bone at a time, in theory, and head comes in. And then inhale, send your tail to the ceiling. As you go up the spine, where are you moving? 10 bones at a time, or no idea what's happening, and bring the head all the way up. Okay, now this motion where you're rounded in is the picture I want you to hold in your head. Come down onto your front. Pull your elbows alongside you. Make two little fists of your hands. Now your fists will not rest on the floor. They're going to be up by your shoulders somewhere. And then tuck your head in. So if you can, you're going to rest on your forehead, or your hairline is going to rest on the mat. You could for sure put a pillow here. So right here on the floor where you're a little more constricted, that shape we just made on all fours of rounding your back to the ceiling, can you think about how you would do that here?
So if you pull the ribs up away from the floor, you can create that downward pressure of the pubic bone. We've already played with this part. If you think of an exhale breath, as you do that, you'll already start to have the abdominal wall contracting. Now, every time you breathe out and you think about pulling the ribs up and you feel the pubic bone press in the floor, start to add on your elbows digging down into the floor. Now, in theory, you have everything you need to achieve the movement. If you can exhale and pull the ribs up so the tail tucks under and dig into the elbows, you should be able to pull yourself up onto your elbows and knees into the precursor to planks and push-ups. When you come down, the whole body is trying to land as one piece back down on the floor. Easy, no? So as you exhale, the ribs lift up, the elbows dig in, the spine pulls up off the floor. Think of keeping the head tucked in the early days. And then as you come down, you're trying to hold tight to your rib cage because that is usually the place people want to go. So common errors are usually this, where one part lifts first and comes back, and then there's a bit of some form of trying to correct up at the top. Sometimes, not so often, but sometimes I'll see this, where the upper body comes first, and then the pelvis comes second, and then again, something tries to correct at the top. It's a lot of work initially to coordinate the head, the rib cage, and the pelvis working as one continuous piece and lifting straight up off the floor and coming back down. But it's something we'll work on in class, whether we're online on Zoom or for real in a live class. I can still see how you move and I can still give you the corrections that you need. So far we've worked lying on your back, sitting up, all fours, lying on your front. The last thing we're going to do is side lying. Now, we do a ton of different exercises here, so I'm just going to pick one. So when you lie on your side, you have a couple of options here. You can use the bottom arm like a pillow, or you can pillow your head up and bring the bottom arm out front, or you can kind of combination. So it's whatever makes you feel comfortable. What's important is to create a straight line. This is always a difficult thing somehow to show on a webcam, but I would use the back edge of the mat and line up your heels, your bum, your shoulders, and your head. And then you have kind of a guide to being straight. If you have a yoga mat like this one, some of them have center lines, so you can use that, can be useful too. Put your spare hand down on the floor and somewhere in line with your belly button or maybe a little bit higher. For some people, when they lie on their side, it's like they're lying on a big golf ball. Now, if you feel that, you can bend the bottom knee forward, which sometimes helps, or you can pick the pelvis up, stick your bum out and sit it back down. And that will often move you in front of that bone and let life be a bit more comfortable. So from here, you're going to bring the top leg up to hip height and bend the knee in towards you and push it back out. So can you see how my hip, my thigh, my shin, my foot, they're all trying to stay at the height of the pelvis. So that's the first place that I want you to tune into. Now we're going to make a straight line from the back edge of the mat to the front edge of the mat. And you're going to bend and straighten your leg all the way along the line. So when you bend your knee in, can you push back to the back edge of that line and bend the knee forward? Push a little in front of the last place and bend the knee forward. A little straight out and bring it in. Now a little forward of your pelvis and bring it in, and a little more forward to the front edge of your mat and bring it in. Now, as you go backward along this straight line, I want you to notice if you have a tendency to poke the ribs forward as your foot goes to the back. And if you can feel that, can you concentrate on keeping the ribs in? And then push forward again, unless you're ahead of me. Now, this time when you come to the front edge of the mat, we're going to climb up. So this time when you push the leg out, lift it a little bit higher, but still above the front edge of the mat, bring it home. Now go a little bit higher and bring it home. Little bit higher and bring it home. For me, this is about the furthest out and bring it in. Now I'm going to go up to that highest corner, bring it in, and then I'm going to go back a little bit and bring it in. So now I'm tracing a line across the top, and I'm going to head back with this leg until I'm hovering over the back edge of the mat. Now I'm going to come down this side until I meet the back of the line we originally drew. And once I'm back there, I'm going to climb back up, coming in and pushing out. Probably one of the less favorite exercises that we do in class, but it takes the hip joint through a pretty big range of motion in one go. And it's not as bad doing it lying on your side as it would be if you tried to do it standing up. Last one. Good. And then bring it in and bring it down. Okay, so you could just roll straight over onto the other side just so that I stay facing towards the camera. I'm going to flick up this end. Stack the feet up, rest the head down. And again, remember you can fold your arm to use that as a pillow. You want to stack the ribs up. And then from here, bring this top leg up to hip height, bend your knee, press it out. So I would do that a couple of times to just try and get a feel of whether you tend to drop the leg as you straighten it or you tend to go high out. Once we've really loaded up all of this tissue here, then you're going to start to work the leg back behind you. So you go back a little bit behind the place you've been kicking out to, and then maybe back one more time. We'll have you over the back edge of your mat. Now come forward of that point and come in, straight out in line with your pelvis, come in, a little ahead of that, come in, and then towards the front edge of the mat, come in. Now we're going to climb up this side, pushing out into the heel, coming in. I usually take about 5 counts. I know that will get me up to my highest point where I haven't had to roll the pelvis backward or forward. Now come along the top line, heading towards the back. And you see how my leg has had to turn out. I've had to open up in that hip joint to get to that corner. Now, as you come down the back line, the leg turns back in to bring you back down. And once I get to that bottom back corner, I'm just going to reverse and come back up. And lucky for you, we're only going to do once round each way, unless you're a glutton for punishment, and in which case you can just keep replaying this a couple of times. So once you're at that top front corner, then you're going to start to come down the front edge. And then once you're all the way down to that bottom front corner, bring the legs all the way back and in. And then from here, the very last exercise we're going to do is to turn onto all fours, ready to come out into some part of the plank. I'll talk you through the bits here. So spread the fingers and thumbs out wide. Set your shoulders over your elbows, over your wrists. We've spoken about this part. Open up the knees and then your shin bones tracking straight back. So your shoulder mechanics really important here.
We'll talk about this again in class, but if you know you have a tendency to collapse between the shoulders, see if you can think of lifting your heart right up into the space between your shoulder blades and have your gaze a little beyond your fingers. Now from here, take one leg out and tuck the toes under so you're on the ball of the foot. This would not be an exercise to do in this position where the back is dropping. Take your tailbone and tuck it under. So you see how I'm flattening out the curve of my back, which means the abdominal wall has to contract. Now you could absolutely just alternate legs and hold this briefly. If you think you can, take the second leg out. Now tuck the tail under, check your elbow creases are forward, check you haven't collapsed into your shoulders, you're pressing up, your neck is lengthening, and that you're breathing. Once you've checked all of that, let your knees bend, come on down to the floor. And that is the end of your intro class. As I said, I've just taken you through some of the basic positions that we use in class because the exercises I'll talk you through and we break them all down. It's really just starting to get an understanding of those spinal mechanics. If you can get those under your belt, you will really be on a great pathway to then starting to work and open out all the other parts. As always, if you have any questions, email me. I always will find the time to reply to any questions. If I feel like it's something that will benefit from a video, I'll do that, post it, and send you the link. So I hope to see you in class soon. We're a really friendly bunch. It's very non-competitive. You'll have a great time and you'll be very welcome to join us.